Has Max signed for Brackley via Sardinia? Why wasn't Horner removed 18 months ago? Is Charles absolutely terrible in the wet? And should Wache be fired and upgraded by Jody Egginton? I answer all of these questions and many more in this week's episode of Your Biggest F1 Questions. I'm Jason Hassett. Welcome to Current Combustion. Let's get into it. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Your Biggest F1 Questions. Of course, as you can expect, there's still lots and lots of questions up in the air about Max's future, what that means, and of course we're going to dive into those, but there are some other questions as well, as you can imagine. So with that all ado, let's jump into this week's Your Biggest F1 Questions straight from the dyno's mouth. We'll pull out the first one. What have we got here? Okay, so from Paige, we have our first question. Will Wache stay at Red Bull, and is Egginton an upgrade? Yeah, so this is based on the news that we saw recently that Jody Egginton could be moved up from Racing Bulls at any given point. Now, the speculation around this is essentially that Horner and Wache were very much a strong alliance over the past few years, and you know, there's a lot of truth to that because in reality, it was always known that Horner was planning for a future without Newey. And, you know, if we build up to 2021, most of that car was built by Wache and Fallows and Balbo, as far as I remember. With Newey very much being, you know, the troubleshooter and helping with kind of overall concept, which makes sense in terms of input in areas that they may have missed and regulation grey areas. And with the new car, it was Wache and his team, again, Balbo, in the day-to-day, with Horner letting Newey do what he does best, which is coming up with the initial kind of concept run for 2022. And we know that he focused on suspension more than anything else, which makes sense given suspension was kind of the key element to these regulations. And that's what gave Red Bull such a leg up over everyone else at the start of this regulation set and through to kind of halfway through last year, essentially, until it seems like McLaren and a couple of other teams, mainly McLaren, figured out that suspension and then went ways over it. So, yeah, it's been very much Wache leading day to day. And what has probably been a huge problem for them is they weren't expecting Newey to go this quickly. Obviously, they weren't expecting him to leave midway through last year. And therefore, it's not that the day-to-day has been affected. I think it's that you don't have that old wisdom of, you know, being able to see way far down the line of something and where, you know, something could give you problems that you perhaps wouldn't expect. And that might sound simplistic, but I mean, if we look at Mercedes as well, the troubles they're having, clearly, you know, they could use someone like Newey who could say, look, guys, you're going to go down this route to fix this, but it's going to cause this, this, and this because I've been there before. And I think that's a simple fact of like Wache and his team just don't have that experience. Basically, no one on the grid does. So where McLaren is beating them, for example, I think is they've got a group of people who have a variety of different experiences working as one technical team instead of the old situation of just having one technical leader. And maybe that kind of quote unquote matrix system, which it doesn't work as well or works better now than it did in the past when you wanted kind of a single technical leader because of the complexity of these new regulations. That's a tangent anyway to say that, yeah, essentially Wache has been the technical leader in charge of all that. And I think, look, can we just be real for a second here? Wache and his team have done a very, 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 very good job of building the car before Newey and after Newey left, you know, in terms of everything. A lot of the design of the car has come directly from Wache and his team, but that doesn't, you know, downplay Newey's input, which has been very, very good as well. The problem here, I think, is simple, which is, and I will get to the Egginton point, I'm building something up here. The problem that we've seen is essentially that they built the car with this huge advantage in 2023. They very much obviously pushed for very, very loaded front end. So, Max can deal with the traction at the back. He likes a nice sensitive front end. A lot of the fastest and best drivers in history like a very pointy nose. Max takes that right to the extreme. And obviously they're going to go down that route because it's the fastest way in general to develop a car. But also if you've got a driver like Max who can drive it on those extremes, which is relatively rare or very rare, then obviously you're going to want to continue down that route. That then is going to make it harder and harder for the second driver, but that wasn't a huge problem for them up until last year because they had such an advantage over everyone else. They could keep pushing down that route and know they had a wide operating window to pull it out of, and just enough of a window for the likes of Perez to kind of, while being far off of Max, if he's 4 to 5 tenths off of Max in 2023 at the start, he's still second place because they had a 7/10 advantage in the races. Then comes Miami, and all of a sudden 6 tenths is putting you way down the order because McLaren has caught up. So you're at least 5th, and that's on a good weekend where, the other teams aren't close enough, which they were dipping in and out of at that point. So by that stage, then your window for operations narrows so far down that you're putting Max on the extreme every single weekend. And while Max is the best driver on the grid, he's not God. And when you push a driver to have to drive a car on its absolute limits all the time, you get problems. Because if you've got a little bit of space to kind of operate in, then all of a sudden, you've got that window where if you're not driving on the limit all the time. So a tiny mistake isn't a huge error. Whereas if you're right on the limit of the car and you push it like 0.5% over, you're in the wall. So, that's going to be a struggle for everyone. And I think the problem is, obviously, Wache built a very good car in that area. And now people will say, yeah, sure. But we saw these problems in 2024. Why weren't they fixed for 2025? Right? Again, I will get to Egginton. I'm just trying to set the stage for the problem here of why I think it would be a bad decision. Wache has built a very, very good car. His team have built a very, very good car. You come to 2025 and you've got a couple of options. You can essentially go back to the full mechanical platform and essentially start from scratch, widen the window out completely to like Racing Bulls level of having a very balanced car, and then try and make it fast. The problem is you've got McLaren who don't need to do that, who are essentially upgrading their car. So everything they're putting on is just performance. They're not worried about balance. In fact, they put on so much performance that they did cause slight balance issues, but they're able to work backwards out of that because they're not stuck in this window. Mercedes tried to change a lot of stuff. It didn't go well for them. And Ferrari changed everything, and look what happened to them. So the problem is if you do that, right, you would be fine doing that if you're in a situation where we've got 25, 26, 27, right? Because you can go, right, guys, look, we're in a really bad position with McLaren here. We know how to fix it, but it's going to take us an entire season because we've got to go back to basics, expand that window, and then level in on performance. They can't do that because there's only 1 year of the regulation left. So they're between a rock and a hard place of just trying to kind of patchwork the car to the extent that they can be performant enough to be close enough to McLaren in 2025, to then layer on a bit more performance, help try to expand the balance a little bit, and just do enough that Max can win the championship. That's what they tried. Turns out McLaren were just even better over the offseason than everyone else thought. And, without going back to basics, the Red Bull was never going to catch up. So I think, yes, there's some blame for Wache, but I think this is overdone. The car last year was the second fastest car on average over the whole season. There was a few races where it was off, but that's more about the other teams catching up. And once the other teams catch up, like I said, they're in this narrow performance window. It's too late to change it. For 2025, it's still too late to completely change it and fix it. So you're stuck in this window. And therefore, I think Wache has done a very good job to deliver Max what has been the second fastest car. It's put him in contention for a little bit of the season. But you can't control what your competitors are doing. And there's just not enough time to change it. So Wache has built, along with Newey, to be fair, and along with the rest of his team, some brilliant cars. And even Wache now, in this really poor situation with no Newey to help, has built a car that has been second fastest on average. Has it been second fastest everywhere? No. It's been third, fourth fastest in some places. It's been the fastest in a couple of places. As much as Verstappen fans, I know you won't want to admit that, but in Jeddah it was the fastest. In Suzuka it wasn't the fastest. It was very, very close, but he put together a spectacular lap. So that was brilliant. And I think there was somewhere else as well. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Imola as well. I think it was the fastest. So Wache has done a decent job. And I think that replacing Wache now would be a terrible idea because in the same vein as replacing Horner, the 2026 stuff is already in full throw. So upsetting that now will just cause more problems than it will solve. You're far better off letting him develop the 2026 car. And once it comes on track, then if you want to replace him, fine, bring someone else in and look at it from a new vantage point and try and fix things. But replacing him now would be a bad idea. As for Jody Egginton, going back to the original question, and I know I've ranted for a bit here, my apologies. Feel free to skip ahead. There is chapters. I don't think Jody Egginton is an upgrade. And I know where this comes from. But Jody Egginton's background is he goes back to the Toro Rosso days. Was he HRT? No, he was Team Lotus. Not the Lotus that Kimi Räikkönen went for, the Malaysian Lotus as well, who finished 11th or 10th in the constructors each year. He was a race engineer in Toro Rosso before that, I believe. He was chief designer, I think, in Team Lotus. Please correct me if I'm wrong below. And after that became, a technical head of some department in Toro Rosso. And finally, when it became AlphaTauri, he was created as the chief technical officer. So he has been the chief technical officer of AlphaTauri since it started. The point on all of this is that the reason there's a clamoring for this is everyone thinks, or at least Verstappen fans seem to think, a lot of fans seem to think that, look, if Yuki Tsunoda and Hadjar can qualify the Racing Bulls into 6th place, then of course Max will be able to get it to the front. It's not as simple as that. And to be honest, even if the qualifying, because of its balance and confidence it gives drivers, allowed Max to actually outqualify the Red Bull, even if that was the case, which I don't believe, to be frank, just looking at all of the data we've had so far, we still know 100% for a fact that car is slower in races. So you could have a Silverstone situation where Max puts in an absolutely blinding lap in a nice, easy car to drive in the Racing Bulls. But it's going to be an even worse Sunday because the car is going to be a lot slower than on Sunday. So my point on this is they've built a very balanced car, but it's relatively easy to build a very balanced car when you're not operating at the peak of performance. We've seen this with McLaren this year. As soon as they get towards that peak of performance, then the balance starts to become a problem because you're basically trading off the ease and comfort for high performance. And when you have a big gain to people, you can mess around in that area. Racing Bulls haven't been there. And the point and the reason I bring that up is it is much easier when you have the funding, when you have all of the infrastructure, when you have the right leadership and all of these things. It is a lot easier to operate in the midfield than it is at the front. Force India were the perfect example of this. They didn't have all the money, but they had a very efficient, very clever team. But that team was always going to operate in the midfield, and it wasn't just a funding thing. Because we saw when that specific team got funding added and new resources added, it didn't just jump to the front. So operating in the midfield compared to operating at the front is a completely different animal. And we see how teams have to kind of gauge that. Look at McLaren last year, how they flustered completely as soon as they were in the title fight last year. As soon as it was an even slight, title fight. I know they won the constructors, but look at all of the mistakes they made. They threw away at least 200 points last year just on, minimal mistakes. So this is all to say, like, operating in the midfield compared to operating at the top end is very, very difficult. On top of that, Jody Egginton, lest we forget, has been in charge of some cars that have been, lackluster when they should have been better. There's been a couple of seasons so far where Scuderia AlphaTauri under his leadership has completely underperformed on where it should be. So there's no saying that he would be any better. And even if he comes across now, I just don't think he's going to be any better than Wache and Balbo as a team. So is it an upgrade? Frankly, no. And I think a lot of the reason why the Racing Bulls is a lot better at the moment as well is due to Mekies helping with the drivers, the infrastructure changes, more so than the technical leadership. So I just don't see it. And I think anyone who thinks that Egginton will be an upgrade, I think must just be of the opinion that, Wache has created a terrible car and he's one of the key reasons for Verstappen's downfall. And I think it's too simplistic a view. And to be honest as well, there's just no proof that Egginton would build a better car. Like, nothing in his career says he can build a top tier car. Maybe he can, but there's nothing to say he can. So he's underperforming until proven guilty. So, yeah, I just don't think so, Paige. Sorry, that was a very long rant. I love technical stuff. Jono asks the big question. Has Max gone to Mercedes via Sardinia? Yeah, so this was the big thing last week, obviously. As soon as Horner left, obviously Max and his cohort of fans, Max wasn't, sorry, his cohort of fans were immediately just gunning for Max to go to Mercedes. And this may still happen. And knowing my luck, it'll happen while I'm editing this video. And if so, I'm still publishing it. So you'll be watching it. But he may still go to Mercedes. But yeah, we saw this craziness of both of their yachts were in Sardinia. And Max went in his jet to Sardinia. And then the jet left after 5 hours. And people immediately assumed, oh, he just went there for a meeting and left. And it's like, well, no, because like the jet was probably dropping him at the yacht. Because you don't like keep your jet in just any airport. It normally flies back to a hangar for hangar fee reasons and all of these things. So like your jet doesn't just stay with you while you're there. And the yachts were miles away from each other, and a lot of rich people keep their yachts there, and all of these things. But people were latched onto this. So no, I don't think they were meeting there. There was actually no confirmation that Toto was even there, and his yacht was, I believe, anchored off the coast. Just ridiculous levels of stalking, and you love to see it. It was hilarious. But yeah, so do I think that meeting has anything to do with it? No, I think a lot of rich people go down there. Like Sonoda apparently has lost his phone in Lake Como, or Lake Como. So like, I think a lot of rich people go to Italy and Greece and so on, Mykonos, for example, during these times. So I don't think there's any there. And to be honest, the one rebuttal I had to that was, guys, why are we jumping on the two of them going to Sardinia when Max and Toto literally live in the same city of Monaco, which is, by the way, one of the smallest cities in the world. So, like, it's not going to be hard for them to meet up for coffee or sneak to one another's apartments or a hotel or something and bump into one another. So, like, they don't need to fly to Sardinia for a meeting. Like, it was a baffling. So yeah, I don't think that's the reason. Now, let's get into the bigger question here, though, because the question is, will Max go to Mercedes? Now, I said last week, I don't think so. And I'm kind of more on that bandwagon soon. So if you're watching this and Max has signed for Mercedes, please comment below, aged like milk, you absolute knob. Because, fine, because I'm probably going to put the thumbnail as not happening with Mercedes, Max at Mercedes or something, because, funniest way to get clickaboos. But I genuinely don't think so. So here's my reasoning, and let's see how this holds up. I did go on a kind of short rant about this last week, but I don't think I filled it out fully, which is, look, I know there has been some talk, and I know a lot of Verstappen fans seem to want to say that the Horner leaving thing had nothing to do with Verstappen. I do think it's interesting that Verstappen fans were calling for Horner to leave. The moment he leaves, they then want Max to leave. So they just want Red Bull to fall apart, I guess. I'm not sure what the thinking was there, because why would you want Horner to go if it doesn't affect your driver anyway? But, here we are. Can let me know that in the comments. I'd love to see some proper reasoning on that, because I know there's somewhere it's like, I just wanted Horner to go because I don't like him. But I mean some proper pragmatic performance reasoning on it. If you just don't like Horner, fine. I get that. Like, don't particularly think he's a great guy either, but pragmatic performance-wise, it didn't make sense. But yeah, so again, long rants. I know that's what this is for. Some of these questions, though, will be a lot shorter, I promise. But these are the couple of big ones. Max, I don't think will go to Mercedes for the following reason, which is the whole Horner situation to me is one of kind of a simple timing. And I think that Max may go to Mercedes for 2027. So specifically, I'm saying I don't think he's going to go for 2026. And the reason behind that is, well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is the Horner situation in terms of timing, right? So there's a few ways you can look at the Horner situation. You can look at it in terms of, this was just the underperformance. They've been wanting to get rid of him for ages, so they got rid of him now. And I think the problem with that, like I said, is timing. Because if it is a situation of the performance has been down over the last 12 months, I know you could say 18 months, but realistically, it's kind of 12, it's 400 days, a little bit over, 13, 14 months. The performance has been down, so we got rid of him. Sure, fine. I get that. I understand that. I think it's a bad decision, but I do understand that these decisions are made. I don't agree with it, but fair enough. The problem I have with that is timing, because if that is the situation, You now have the power to do it. You don't rush to do it because apparently the decision came over the course of a week beforehand. You take your time. You don't need to tell everyone about it, but you kind of go, okay, right. If he goes and Wache leaves and this guy leaves, who do we put in place? Who becomes the CEO? Because just grabbing Mekias across seems like the easiest stopgap. It doesn't seem like the right choice, maybe, in my view. Plus, you don't want Mekias to just jump in and have to get on top of things when there's a regulation coming up. And I know from everything I've heard from, listening to other engineers talk about this and just from watching for a long time, changing your technical director or team boss right before a regulation set is always a bad decision anyway. You're better off just keeping that continuity so that when you come into the new season, right, okay, maybe we didn't start off well in 2026, but changing him now is just going to make that worse because whatever changes we make now, it's too late to kind of fuck around with the 2026 design anyway, the engine project. So you want to keep that whole team together, let them build up, and then we'll deal with the chaos next year. So in terms of replacing Horner now, doesn't make sense if it's on performance. And for the exact same reason, a lot of people seem to think, a lot of people with Dutch flags in their name seem to think that that Verstappen has decided to leave already. And maybe he has. Again, this may age like milk. And therefore, Verstappen has decided to leave, and that's why Horner went. And again, that just goes back to everything I said in my previous point, which is if Verstappen has already left, there is no timer on this. So you don't need to just randomly announce it now. You can prep everything, you can take your time, and at the end of the year, you can kick him out. You can say to him, right, you're gone at the end of the year, and this is your replacement. You bring a replacement in, and you just keep an absolute watchful eye on him. And because you've terminated the contract, if he tries any fuckery during that 6 months anyway, you have him dead to rights on like a legal thing of not getting his payout. So it actually gives you more months not to pay him anything as well, because he'll try something, or you hope he'll try something. So that doesn't make sense to me. So the only thing that makes sense in timing wise, in logical sense to me, is that they thought that if, Max was on his way out, they know that Jos has been complaining about Horner. They know that Max is very close to Helmut. Helmut has been complaining about Horner. So they figure that if they can appease, even if it's not directly Max, if they can appease Jos and Helmut, then they can appease Max through those guys. And the easiest way to do that is say, look, guys, we know you're not happy. We've had enough as well. Minslav comes in and says, Horner's gone. We don't care what it costs. We're going to keep you guys happy. So that seems like the most logical reason for me. Now, this could all fall apart on one simple thing, which is removing Horner to keep Verstappen isn't logical anyway. I know you may disagree with that, but like, drivers come and go, and realistically, Verstappen was probably going to go in the next couple of seasons anyway. And if they gave Verstappen a really good car next year, it wouldn't actually matter. If it wouldn't actually matter if Verstappen was there, and if Verstappen stayed and said, "Right, I'll give it one more season," they built a really good car for next year, then Horner being in charge wouldn't matter. So, picking a driver over a team principal is always kind of a silly decision, no matter who they are, because the driver brings that last bit of performance and can help with feedback. But if you have a bad car, no good driver is going to fix that. And if you have a great car, then most drivers will be able to perform relatively well with it. And if you have a great car also, you can get a talent that may not be the top tier like Max. You can get a George Russell, a Leclerc, a Piastri to come in. And while they may not give you the consistent every weekend absolute top like Max does, they'll give you enough to win a championship if you have the right car. So that's why I don't buy it. The second reason that I think that Max isn't leaving is Helmut's position. We know that Helmut and Verstappen and his team are very, very close. We know that Helmut was the one reason last year that basically Verstappen was adamant about that he wasn't leaving, but if Helmut was to go, it would be a different discussion, basically indicating he would leave, right? Helmut was kind of thinking about retirement anyway. And I think one of the reasons he stuck around is because the Verstappens wanted him there, and at kind of revenge to Horner with their little fight reinvigorated him. So I think now that Horner's gone, he has no real reason to stick around if Verstappen goes. It's kind of time's up for him. He's just going to be handing over. And he's committed to stay till the end of 2026. And he reiterated that he was committed to stay till the end of 2026 in the last week. and talking about working with Verstappen in those interviews. So all of that tells me that he's staying. And I think that the other thing he's probably looking at as well is, okay, if Mercedes do have the best engine next year, they may not necessarily be at the top, because Mercedes, like, a lot of people are clamoring to say, well, Mercedes is going to easily beat McLaren next year because they're a works team and they're going to build the best engine. But McLaren will have a very good engine next year because it's the same engine. And you may say it's a works team, but that works team is being outperformed by McLaren in this generation with the same engine. So what makes you think that won't happen in the next season? There's no reason to think it won't, because they both have to get parity of engines now. So it's not like 2014. So given that Mercedes still, after 4 seasons, don't understand how to build a car, like, they really just don't understand where their performance comes from, maybe he doesn't have complete confidence in that either. So the most pragmatic solution is stay till 2026, see how things lay out, and then go knocking on doors, which may be a problem as well. But I don't think there's any easy solution for him. So I think he's staying. Happy to be proven wrong. I just hope he's lined up against George, because it would be cinema. It would be so much fun to watch the two of those as teammates, but it'll probably be Kimi. Thank you for that question, by the way. Sorry. Hope that answers it. A page. Jono, here's for that. Let's see what we got next. Val says, if Max leaves Red Bull, who will drive for Red Bull in 2026? I think if Max goes for 2026, it means he's gone to Mercedes or Aston Martin. Well, let's say Mercedes for now. I don't think, if he wants a long-term project, I don't think he goes to Aston right now anyway. I think he sees how they perform next year, make sure it all kind of works out, because Alonso will stay for next season, which means you don't have to kind of gun your way in, because if next season you start off at Red Bull with a bad situation or whatever, and Aston are at the front, then you can just line yourself up for 2027 anyway. So I think if he's going to Aston, he does it for 2027. I think Mercedes is the big rush. So let's assume he's going to Mercedes. I think that then leaves George Russell out of a contract, and George is going to only have a few places to go. Now, George may go to Aston because Stroll may leave, or they may just look at it as a longer term strategy than keeping Fernando, which would hurt me. Should be Stroll. But I would assume that if George gets the boot from Mercedes by Toto, there's 1 or 2 places he goes. He either goes to Alpine or Aston, or he goes to Red Bull. Now, it depends on how it ends, really, doesn't it? Because Red Bull may be where he goes if Toto boots him out and he doesn't want to stay in the Mercedes program anymore, because he may not want to be a Mercedes driver anymore. So I'd hope he go to Aston. I don't. But I think the simple fact is that if George gets the boot from from Mercedes, I think that's who Red Bull go for one of their seats, because I think that Red Bull, it's the best driver on the grid realistically. So I think that Red Bull buy him out of his contract there. But pay big bucks to get him in there, because there's literally no one else who comes close to Max in terms of performance and being able to drive really difficult to drive cars, or tricky to drive cars, than George, who's driven in shit cars for his entire career and adapted immediately whenever he jumps into things for the most part. So I think George, if Max goes, is the logical solution. And I think George could probably dictate terms there, because they'd be, in a problematic situation. If you were thinking about it in terms of just performance, who Red Bull would choose, the logical solution would be to get George alongside Sainz. They would work well together. Sainz has the experience, all of those things, and they're not going to want to go backwards and bring Albon in. I know Sainz was there before as well, but he was in the junior team, all of these things, and he's performed very well. So I think Sainz makes the most sense. The problem with that, though, is I think that Sainz won't want to go. I think if Verstappen leaves, Sainz is going to see a sinking ship. He's probably sick of, revolving doors of moving around anyway. Maybe he jumps, But I mean, if Verstappen goes, he probably knows that's because Verstappen has absolutely no confidence in Red Bull for next year, and that Verstappen has seen more confidence in Mercedes to have the engine for next year, which Williams will also have, and Williams is on an upward trend. So I would guess that if Sainz gets the opportunity and Verstappen leaves, Sainz probably stays put, which might not be the worst decision he could make. So I'm going to say they're going to stick with one of their program. Now, I don't think it's going to be Yuki, because I think Yuki's confidence by the end of the season is going to be destroyed. So I think we go back to revolving doors, and I know that Yuki wasn't a long-term solution for Red Bull anyway. So unless Yuki turns it around, I'm going to guess he goes. So I would say they put Hadjar in because Hadjar has the experience. Hadjar comes in for 2026 while they prep Lindblad. And then depending on how Hadjar goes and how well Lindblad performs, it's a conversation for 2027. So it could well be, if Max leaves, that it's George and Tsunoda. But if I had to take a stab at it and just guess, I would imagine it would be George and Hadjar. So let's see. There is a couple of non-Red Bull ones in here as well, if I remember correctly. So let's see. Oh, that's 2. Jesus, another Red Bull one. Sorry, guys. Like I said, if you're bored of Red Bull, you can use the chapters below. Tom says, why wasn't Horner fired 18 months ago? Look, I think this is the simple fact of, you got to keep in mind, first of all, even firing Horner now, they are looking at, by the minimum, I reckon, $40 to $50 million to pay him out, because it looks like they haven't been able to fire him for any performance clauses, which makes me think that Horner, given his strong stature at the team before Dietrich died, and given they know Dietrich was kind of, on his last days, I'm sure Horner had a long-term contract tied up because Dietrich didn't want the board running the team. If you don't believe that, that's fine, but every action that he took over the last 20 years tells you that this was supposed to be separate from the politics of Red Bull. So I would imagine Horner had a very long contract with no performance clauses, or maybe performance clauses that were very kind of like, Red Bull has to completely fall apart, as in be like 5th in the championship or 10th in the championship or something. I don't know. But I'm assuming so, because we're looking at a situation right now where we know for a fact that the two parties are in talks about payouts. And it seems like Horner is gunning for, from what I've heard, anywhere up to 80 to 100 million. The Red Bull board is looking for 20 to 40. So it seems like there's kind of a 50 million kind of middle ground looked at. Could be wrong on the numbers there. I'm hearing them, different ones from different people. So who knows? But that's what the talks are about now, is the payout. And as usual, it's a case of, Horner wants to leave at the end of this season to kind of jump on where he's going to go to next, I would imagine. They want him on 12 months gardening leave, so he doesn't take any staff with him. So it's going to be probably Horner wants, 100 million if they're going to make him leave at the end of, or do his full gardening leave. They're offering 30 with 6 months or something. They'll try and meet in the middle somewhere. So that's where we're at the moment, which tells me basically they didn't have a reason to fire him last year, unless they could fire him for some sort of cause, as in he's broken the law, or, he's actually done something which could bring the entire company into disrepute. So firing him for cause, right? Performance doesn't bring the company into disrepute because it's a sport. You know what I mean? So you can't fire someone unless they have performance clauses for performance. That's why performance clauses are always extra. So the reason he wasn't fired 18 months ago is essentially he brought the company into disrepute, according to them. There was a allegation brought against him for sexual harassment by someone in the team, alleged sexual harassment by, I believe, a former PA or his PA. I can't remember the exact situation now. It's a long time ago. And he was essentially brought through an entire process by one internal investigation, which he got cleared by, and a external third party KC, which is a King's Court judge, basically, King's Court investigation. And he was cleared from that one as well. So, do I think he did something bad? Yeah, I do. And I don't know if you saw the pictures, but there was a picture of a finger, and if you're gentleman's area looks like a finger, get yourself checked. It definitely wasn't a picture of a gentleman's sausage. But anyway, that being done, I think he did something wrong because he's married and he was texting his PA very intimate stuff, right? From what we saw. If those WhatsApps are real, I think they were. From what I've heard, they were. But this AI age, who knows? And they were sent to the entire paddock, which then caused another investigation, all these different things. So the point is he was cleared of these investigations. What it looks like and what I've heard is it couldn't be brought, like he did basically do something which is wrong on an ethical level. But it seems like from what I heard at the very start, at the very least, she was consenting to this relationship for a certain amount of time. And again, this is all alleged. A lot of this is closed off. So this is just rumor, what I'm hearing. So take it with a grain of salt that, if the woman was actually harassed, that's way worse and he should have been removed. But this is where it stands. So goes through all of that. And it looks like basically what they came to the conclusion of is this was a consensual relationship until it wasn't. She kind of got annoyed about it and then he backed off. But by that late time, it leaked to Goss and Helmut and the board and so on. And they all went on a tirade. So that was their chance to take him out. They tried it twice, didn't work because clearly they couldn't prove it. And here's why I think that was the right decision. Because, look, I don't think what he did is a good thing. I don't, right? But if two consenting adults want to do something like that, ethically, I think it's wrong. He's married, so he shouldn't be doing it. But it's not legally wrong. Now, if it was sexual harassment and workplace predatory, fine. I agree he should go. But that should need to be proven. Because over the last 20 years, we've had too many of these situations where there has been, allegations brought where when you go through all of the evidence, it has been people looking for money, or it has been a woman who's seen it from the wrong side or taken something wrong, or cases where the woman has actually been the one instigating things. And when the man kind of pushes away, she goes down the legal route because it's the easy way. The problem is that annoys me so much because then that takes away from the real situations. Because in the real situations, what happens is now, just to explain this better, there's hundreds or thousands or millions, I'm sure, of real situations where men who do this stuff should be fired, should be removed, should have their, entire, public image smeared. But now we're in a situation where this quote unquote Me Too movement has come back around and caused a problem. Because over the last 10 years, allegations have been made and people who didn't actually do things wrong or did something wrong that was not near the border, but people just didn't like it because of the cultural situation, lost everything only to be found innocent afterwards. So the problem with that then is, as that happens more and more and more, real situations, people are a bit more skeptical about actually dealing with them. So I think it's the right decision to investigate first, not fire someone. You can tell them, look, they should have suspended him, I think, ending the investigation. That's the only thing I think they should have done, with full pay and all of this stuff. But it shouldn't have come out in the public, first of all. But yeah, I just think you can't fire someone unless you can prove what they did. Look, if you think Horner should have been fired last year for that situation, then think about it logically, get rid of your personal disdain of Horner for a moment, and think about it from this simple solution. You're flirting with a girl at work, you're her boss, it's ethically wrong, but you're both consenting adults. I'm not saying this is what happened, but just imagine this situation, because this is what it looks like from the outset of why it was passed. Imagine you're in that situation and then she brings a claim against you. You've done nothing legally wrong. You were both consenting adults. And then you get fired from your position and smeared only to be able to prove later on that you did nothing wrong, but it's too late. Would you be happy in that situation? Do you think that's the way it should go? Or would you prefer to be able to have your day in court and prove that it never happened and then get back to your job? I'm sure it's the latter. So just replace Horner with your own name for a minute. and think to yourself, would you be okay with it? That's why he wasn't fired 18 months ago. Whether you like him or not, processes need to be processes. Anyway, God, it's never personal. I don't think this wasn't a question he asked for this podcast, by the way. This was just something he posed because it was in the comments of something I said, which is 10% is the driver, question mark. So this is where he was talking about, or this is where he was commenting on the fact that I said last week, I believe it was, that a driver makes up for 10 to 20% of the car. Now, let's not just focus on Max here. Let's just make this interesting, because I did say it about Max, but I genuinely believe this about everyone. I think in certain instances it's more, certain instances less. For example, in the wet races and so on, it's 20%, I think 30% maybe in a really tricky wet race. But yeah, I think generally it's 10% the driver. Because at the end of the day, as I've said a billion times, a driver can't overdrive the car, right? A car can be very tricky to drive, like is the Red Bull. And a driver like Max should get all the praise in the world for doing things like Schumacher and Senna in the past, for example, extracting the ultimate performance from a difficult car to drive, like Alonso in 2005, and getting it to its limit when most other drivers can't do it, right? So Tsunoda, Perez, Gasly, Albon, all alongside him haven't been able to drive these tricky cars, and Max has. And that makes him the best driver on the grid as far as I'm concerned, because he's in a very tricky car and does this every weekend. It's incredibly impressive. That is impressive enough. You don't need to make him God and say, well, the car's actually slow. It's him making it faster. No, the car is really fast if you drive it a certain way. And Max does that every single weekend. Now, whether the car is adapted for him or whether, like built for his driving style, for that extremes, or whether he is adapted to it, I think both are equally as impressive. Because the point is, even if the car was built for him, we know that these other drivers who've been in there are not awful drivers, and yet they are nowhere near him. So even if it's built for him, the fact that he's able to drive a car that is that difficult to drive is impressive alone. Point is, that is enough praise without trying to think that, oh, well, the car is actually 7th fastest. It's just Max. No, the car is 2nd fastest if you can drive it a certain way. Turns out only Max can do that. But the car is still 2nd fastest. If my car can go 190 miles an hour and I drive it at 150 max, that's as far as I can go before I start losing grip. That doesn't mean the car can't go 190 miles an hour. That means I can't drive at 190 miles an hour. So if Ayrton Senna sits in my car and drives at 190 miles an hour, Ayrton Senna hasn't made that car faster. He's just accessing the limit where I can't. You know what I mean? Like, it's as simple as that. So the reason I say it's 10% is because, first of all, you've got the car. The car is easily 70%, right? Because if you have a slow car, no driver can make up for it. And if it was 50-50 or 60-40 the driver, then a driver would be able to make up for a slow car. Because if it was 60-40 and Max was most of the reason the car was fast, then why on some weekends can't he catch Mercedes? Like, you can't say, car was really fast this weekend, so Max was the one that was brilliant and he made all the difference. And then when the car's shit, go, what, did Max just give up that weekend? Like, you can't just pick and choose what suits your narrative, is my point. So yes, Max is brilliant, but the car is most of it. Now, the 10% thing I say, because I think the way it breaks down for me is, I think it's 70% the car, 10% setup and engineers getting the car in the right window for each track, 10% strategy, because at the end of the day, like, if the wrong strategy is there, you could be off. Now, the driver has some input on that, so that's where you get into that argument of, is it 80-20 because, driver making right calls and so on. But the driver needs to still be given all of that information by the strategy team, all the information of the track, the future, all of these things, and would have to override that strategy all the time for it to be a consistent 20%. And the final 10%, I think, on most weekends, other than wet, crazy weekends, is the driver. Now, 10% probably seems crazy low to you, but let's put this in perspective, right? At the last track at Silverstone, from 1st to 19, excluding Colapinto, it was 7/10, a little bit under 7/10, less than a second, split the entire grid, right, between all of them. So like, it's 10% is so close because, or 10% is so much, sorry, because 10% of a minute long lap would be 6/10, right? Am I wrong in saying that? So 60 seconds, no, it'd be 6 seconds. 10% would be 6 seconds. So that's a lot, right? I'm right on that math there, right? I think so. 10% will be 6 seconds. So 10% is saying a huge amount. So this is my point. I think when I say 10%, everyone's like, oh, that's so little. But you got to take that 10% into the fact that Formula One is all about those minuscule moments, those minuscule changes, tenths of a second. So a 10% difference, like if, let's say this, right? If the driver makes up 10% and it's a 60-second lap, 10% is 6 seconds, right? That last 10%, let's say Max is 100%. Right? Think about it this way. So between Max and the car, you have your 100%. If George has a car and he is 1% less, then he's at 6/10 off of Max. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong. This may be absolute bollocks maths. The point is, 1%, 2% is 6/10 to a second. It's a huge amount of difference. So to say 10% is actually a lot. Like, it really is. I think people just take it as a dig at Verstappen, which is not meant to be. Because I apply it to every driver. Every driver. What makes Max great is he can do that every weekend. Jeff, best guess for top 3 teams in 2026. I think this one's pretty straightforward, pretty quick. I think it's going to be, and this is where I'm going to be called crazy, I think it's going to be McLaren. I'm going to do top 5. I'm going to think McLaren, Mercedes, Aston, Red Bull, Ferrari would be my call. I'll give you a quick reason on that. Mercedes and McLaren are going to have the best engines. There is now parity between them. So I think that the Mercedes engine probably, I just think it does make sense to me that Mercedes will have the fastest engine. So I think they will have the best engine, the fastest engine, the most reliable engine, all of those things. McLaren have been working with the Mercedes engine and have had less issues with the Mercedes engine than the Works team over the past season. So they obviously know how to handle it. And when it comes to packaging, I think the advantage that Mercedes have in terms of they can build the engine to work with whatever packaging they've got is lessened by the fact that Mercedes seem to have a deep issue with actually understanding the correlation between their car and the on-track, especially in this ground effect era. Now, there'll be less ground effect next year, but it won't be gone. And we will also have more complex aero, such as movable aero front and back. We'll still have some ground effect. We'll have some top aero as well. And I think when it comes to the full aero team and building an aerodynamically efficient car with suspension for this new setup, which is not going to be a small thing, and all of the moving aero and so on, I have more confidence in McLaren to do that. So I think that the difference between the two in terms of what they can do with the engine is going to be so minuscule that I think McLaren will have the one leg up there. That would be my guess. But I do think Mercedes will be a close second because I think they'll have the biggest engine advantage. And I don't think Alpine and Williams could jump straight away because they have too much, even though they'll have the same engine. I think Honda will build a decent engine, like a very good, reliable engine. I think it'll lack a little bit on performance. That's why I put them third. But I think where it lacks in performance, I do think it will build up quickly. But I think just for 2026, I think there'll be a little bit of a distant third. I don't think they'll be right up there because of the engine, but I do think Newey will find some stuff that both McLaren and Mercedes won't. That'll put them in the fight. I think Red Bull still, as much as you want to write them off, has a very competent team in terms of aero. So I think they'll be up there fighting with Aston. I think the engine will leave them a little bit behind. And then never underestimate Ferrari's, willingness and competence in terms of fucking up. So I put Ferrari 5th on that list. It'll be interesting. See where it goes. Next on the lists. ZLM, this could be a very quick one, but it's great. Could you imagine if Hamilton won his 8th championship at Ferrari with Horner as team principal? Well, it would only be a 7th because obviously Massa, as we all know, is the rightful 2008 world champion. I'm kidding, of course. No, I couldn't imagine it for a variety of reasons. I think, first of all, I think if Horner comes in, I don't think Hamilton and Horner will work well together. Maybe I'll be wrong there. Maybe they'll put their bygones behind them just to get together for it. But I don't think it'd be a great working relationship. The second reason is I think that if Horner goes to Ferrari, it's going to be still a decent project time, because he's going to have to fix a lot of the issues and get the board to shut the fuck up. So that's going to take a while. On top of that, I don't think Horner is going to Ferrari, to be perfectly honest. And therefore, I don't think it's going to happen. And finally, I think if Horner does go to Ferrari, I think Leclerc stays because he'll know what a big deal that is. And I think he'll want to stick around just in case. And therefore, I think even if they do build the title-winning car, I think Leclerc beats Hamilton over the season anyway. So no, I can't imagine it. It would be an epic story, though. I'd be here to see it. I would love to see it, but I can't see it happening. And the final question today. Oh, a big one. Focused on Leclerc. Clark asks, is Leclerc bad at driving in the wet? So this is an interesting one. And we got asked this on the Blatantly Biased Racing podcast yesterday. And myself and Casual very much kind of didn't know where to take this one because we were trying to think about all of Leclerc's performances in the wet. And what we've essentially found is he's kind of underwhelming. So I decided before, because I got this question and I was like, I'm going to actually do some research on it. So I decided to do this one a little bit more statistically accurate than I normally would and to go through some races. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I've got a race by race scorecard on this so we can kind of run through it and see that Leclerc is not terrible in the wet, but definitely not one of the best, is the conclusion I've come to. So realistically, is he terrible in the wet? The quick answer, if you just want a quick answer, no. But I don't think he's top 5. So that could be terrible depending on how you're judging it. You know what I mean? So is he the worst on the grid? No. Is he the best on the grid? No. Max is in the wet. Let's be honest here. So let's go race by race, quick scorecard. Now, I don't know if I've covered them all, but I think I have. Probably haven't actually, but let me see. Correct me, right? 2019, Hockenheim. He was faster on Vettel than the slicks before the VSC stop. But then DNF, he had a crash at T16. He made a bit of a driver error, lost the rear on a painted asphalt, and lost low grip while chasing the lead. So he crashed. It was his first season in Ferrari. Car wasn't great anyway. I think that's one where I'd kind of let it go. 2020, then Turkey. He was P4 in a terrible car. This was one where I think you give him a checkbox of an absolutely brilliant drive. He was P4. He was quicker, 7/10 quicker than Vettel on intermediates in the stint. But he had a single late brake lockup on a very greasy track, and lost P2. So he finished behind Vettel, but I think it was a great race, to be fair. And Vettel's brilliant in the wet. Like, people can write off Vettel. Vettel is brilliant in the way. You should watch my new Car Heroes episode. You should watch my new Car Heroes episode, which is about the entire career of Sebastian Vettel, out now. 2021, he was in Imola, P4. He ran an early P2, kept Hamilton at bay, finished P4. Clean drive, hampered by the late red flag in Imola, which helped Hamilton come back in a much faster car. Hamilton was very lucky during that race. 2021, Sochi. Gained 15 places from the back of the grid. But he got stuck behind Sainz in the pits, then committed to slicks as the shower intensified, which was a bad idea, same as Norris, but had gained 15 places before that. Ferrari double stack in Monaco in 2022, famously awful. Finished P4. Singapore finished P2. Just couldn't undercut Perez. So I think that one was fine. Japan in 2022 finished P3. He had a 5-second penalty for cutting the chicane, but he was fighting Perez. Gave him a small lockup and so on. Still much quicker than Sainz. 2023, he crashed in Zandvoort. 2024 Silverstone, call to Inters, as you guys probably remember. Terrible call. There was Canada as well in 2024. Terrible calls by Ferrari. Terrible weekend. 2024 Spa, they had the qualifying, heavy rain. He qualified in second, I think. Brilliant qualifying lap. and the race was dry, so it doesn't count. And Silverstone then outqualified Hamilton, but finished P14, called in for the intermediates 2 laps before, and so on. So, here's what I would say before I get into actual benchmarking. He has had a couple of mistakes in the wet, which every good driver has had. I mean, Verstappen in Silverstone, Hamilton in Imola made mistakes as well. For example, in 2021, Vettel 2018. Lots of people made mistakes during Hockenheim 2019. So in terms of actual mistakes, he hasn't made that many, but he's made more than Verstappen, for example. He also has had some good pace in the wet, but not brilliant. But the majority of what I can see from looking back over it, of his issues, have been basically down to driving for Ferrari. And Ferrari make really bad strategy calls. So I'll get onto that in a sec, but it leads me back to, I did some benchmarking. Now, again, this is pub maths, so it's not great, but give you a general idea of where he stacks up against some other drivers, which are Hamilton, Verstappen, Norris, and Sainz. Sainz I include because he was driving alongside him. In terms of Hamilton, wet podium percentage from 2019 to 2025 is 73%. Now, we do need to keep in mind that, for 2-3 of those seasons, Hamilton was in a very, very good car, but still very good, 73%. Average positions gained in the race in rain, 5.1%. And strategic call accuracy, Hamilton's at 83%. Of those. And Turkey, he famously called himself in 2020 when he sealed his 7th championship. Wet Grand Prix podiums from 2019 to 2025. Again, bearing in mind Verstappen's cars haven't been the top as well, but have been for some of these. 67%, just a little bit under Hamilton. Average position gained in rain, 4.7%. I think that is a little bit of an outlier because most of the time these guys have been starting up the front anyway, so positions gained for those guys, not that important, I guess. But strategic call accuracy, 76%. Norris, 33%, so only a third of wet podiums. Can't really blame him too much for that, though, given where the car was over those seasons. 3.4 positions gained, 60% strategic call accuracy in terms of pitting at the right time, picking the right tires, all those things. Again, that's not always down to the driver, but just the accuracy in general. Leclerc has had a 22% Grand Prix podium in the rain. Very, very low, but where the car was, I guess you could say, for a lot of those seasons as well. Toss it up in the air, but it is very low, which is why people, I think, are calling this. Average positions gained, 2.9, and a 54% strategic call on accuracy. Now, I think the damning one for Leclerc is where his teammate was. Now, his teammate was in other teams for 2 of these seasons. So he was in McLaren for 2019, 2020. So that is to be kept in mind. But Sainz, 28% wet podium rate. Pretty good. 3.2 positions gained. And a 71% strategic call accuracy. So the reason I bring this up is I think the podium position gained, they're kind of voodoo ones. Strategic call accuracy tells me Leclerc's real issue here. Because I think Leclerc is actually a very good driver in the wet. He's made a couple of mistakes, but I think Leclerc's downfall in the wet is that wet podiums and wet, driving very, very well in the wet, means knowing the exact time to call your strategy. And Leclerc doesn't seem very good at that. Leclerc historically has basically gone completely faith all in with his team on strategy. Whereas the other drivers on this list, other than, say, Norris, so Sainz, Verstappen, and Hamilton, will push back on their team and also have had better teams calling the shots than Ferrari. So I actually think if we put bottom line down on it, the simple fact is I think that Leclerc is not a terrible driver in the wet. I just think strategically he's not great at calling his own strategy, and he has a terrible team in Ferrari. I think that's his downfall. But with all of that data in mind, I would put him fifth. I think that Verstappen, Hamilton, Russell, probably Norris now as well. And probably Alonso are ahead of him too. I think we need to see where Alonso is still these days and so on. Because it's been, he's been in shit cars for a while, but he's done pretty good in the wet. So yeah, I'd put Alonso ahead of him. And Piastri, maybe. Like, don't know though. Let's see. But yeah, not terrible, not great. This has been your biggest F1 questions. Please, guys, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next week. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. That is all of the questions from this week's Dyno's Mouth. I'll talk to you soon.